Rashonda Thornton, the host of the Dietitian Against Diets podcast show. Thanks to the local farmers and wonderful supporters such as Undeniably Dairy, we are proud to present to you the weekly Wellness Coalition panel series. This is a 10-part series where myself and a rotating cast of experts will discuss meaningful topics, focusing on what means the most to you during this COVID crisis. So that means every Thursday, I'll have panel guests that will bring great insights, perspectives, truths, and possible solutions. So again, thanks to Undeniably Dairy and the local farmers, this is able to be aired to you every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. on my Facebook page at Rashonda Up Better Bustle. You can also see it on my YouTube channel and all other podcast stations and podcast platforms. So enjoy the show, and please reach out if you have any questions or have any topics that may be of interest to you. Okay, everyone, this is Rashonda Thornton again, the Dietitian Against Diets podcast show. As you all have known over the last 6 or 7 weeks, I am doing this weekly Wellness Coalition panel that's just having riveting conversations that's hovered around what we're going through during the COVID-19 crisis. And actually, right now, there's some other crises we're also facing. So for this particular week, we're going to focus on our kids and their well-being during the COVID-19 crisis. And before I go deeper into that topic, I want to introduce my lovely guests that I have on the panel today. I have first with me Dr. Amy Beck. She is a child psychologist at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City. Welcome, Dr. Beck.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Julie Walther-Scheibeil. Yes, I said it correctly.
You did.
She's a licensed professional counselor and owner of Counseling with Julie here in St. Louis. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yes, glad you're here. And last but definitely not least, I have here Emily Lehr. She is a school guidance counselor at Oakville Middle School here in St. Louis. So Emily, thank you for being on as well. Did you hear me, Emily? Maybe
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's a little bit of lag. Oh, you're great. We're on technology time now, so we'll work through it. So I'm glad to have all you ladies on today. This particular topic, you all have different areas of expertise in this, and so this will be some great conversations for the viewers and for me as well. So we'll just start off and just really talking about how families are adjusting to this COVID-19 crisis. I know this has been, we've been adjusting for the last 10 to 8 weeks, but adjustment doesn't have a timeline. So I definitely know that they're still having those growing pains. And I want to kind of highlight a few of them right now. So I'm going to start with you, Emily. I know that you being at school was summer has started maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago. There has been, you've had opportunity to work with your students before summer was over, and also with their parents, I'm assuming. So, but I know when it comes to parenting, having to explain what's happening can be overwhelming and very complicated and complex. Have you, from your experience, have you been able to work with some parents, or have you seen how how they have been having to adjust to talking to their kids about the effects of COVID, everything from social distancing, what's appropriate for their ages and things like that?
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that initially the information that we were getting was changing on a daily basis. So what we needed to tell kids one day wasn't necessarily what we were hearing from the experts the next day. So we usually recommend that parents talk in an age appropriate way with their kid. We don't need to give them too much information, that's going to really elevate their fears, because there's enough fear just in the basic information here. And then along with explaining some of the risks and the things that we're going to be needing to do differently, we also explain that, hey, but we have things that we can do to make our families safer. And we're going to be doing these things and doing everything that we can to keep you safe and to keep the rest of our families safe. And having that reassurance, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I'm sure, because you get information as a parent and you have to kind of absorb it and work it through, and then there's a big gap between what you know and then trying to communicate that with your kids. I know that can be a struggle.
Absolutely. Yeah. And all of a
Mm.
sudden telling kids that you're not going to your sporting events anymore, or you're, not going to be able to hang out with your friends, things like that, that they just don't want to hear and are, they sound so foreign, all of a sudden has to be the new normal. And
So, Emily, you just mentioned something about, the changes that they're seeing, the kids are having, just getting out of school, not being able to be a part of the summer programming, and just kind of transitioning into that, not really knowing what's going on.
Well, I think we're realizing more than ever how many different roles schools play in a child's life. We certainly think of, education being the primary role, but there's just a lot of, stability with the typical daily routine, the adults that, are eager to see the kids when they come to school and those kind of interactions. Having their peers around. Food certainly is a role that schools play. We have quite a few students that, eat both breakfast and lunch at school, and that puts a real burden on families when they don't have that available. So there's so many different aspects to the changes in school and how these have affected the kids and the families.
Yes, and I totally agree. I've had some of the past panels. We've talked with like organizations like Operation Food Surge. I've
Mhm.
talked with the Boys and Girls Club. So I'm seeing just the efforts that they're having. They're trying to fill in those gaps to provide at least the food part, because that'll alleviate some parts of the stress that some of the parents are facing. And that leads
Yeah.
to even talking about stress. Because one thing I think we don't realize, especially when we're parents caught up in our own stress, we sometimes can kind of dismiss kids and their feelings and what they're going through. And Julie, I'm going to toss this over to you because you work with students and adults, and
Mhm.
how would you, how have you seen, these kids and how they are feeling, just kind of like overlooked, or no one's really understanding their pain and what they're going through, and how adults are addressing it.
Yeah, so I think also to add on to the school part, which is what's interesting, is that there's a lot of, structure in a school day. There is, like you said, so their school isn't there, their friends aren't there, their activities aren't there. And especially with all kinds of activities. So whether it be the sports they play, any PE they get, any recess, that is a way to alleviate stress that sometimes goes unnoticed in families, or even the kids. They don't realize that because they've been active outside, or playing around with friends, or at their sporting events, that it actually reduces their anxious thoughts, helps
Hmm.
relax them. So that's been removed. And I'm not saying they haven't been able to play outside, or have some movement during being at home for all of this time frame, but it is really affects, so it can have an effect emotionally on them, and that takes away and ramps up then some anxiety. So I'm seeing a lot of not as much fear of the disease, so to speak, more the uncertainty of what it means moving forward. And I think a lot of the times the parents, you kind of think, well, you kind of just have to, get on your computer, do your schoolwork, then you're watching TV and you do some chores around the house, or it's not that hard, but because there's more stress on the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that filters down, and they don't realize that. And, because it's unprecedented for the parents as well. So
True.
it's hard to kind of know exactly what to say or how much to say. And so sometimes there can be a little bit of a disconnect, because some of my clients have reached out, and I've done a lot of virtual things for a while. I've just recently gotten back into the office within the last actually week or so. And the parents would reach out, and it'd be almost frustrated that the kids were frustrated, sort of.
Hmm.
And so I think, I mean, not in a negative way, just in like not understanding so much way. We're at home, school, isn't as long, so So I think so I've seen it really come into play when the structure isn't there. And a lot of times we think, oh, they like all the downtime, and they do, but we went from a lot of structure and a lot of activities to like nothing and being around hardly anybody for a really long time. And that is really emotionally draining for kids.
True. And they don't express it the way we express it. So we, as
No.
parents, I assume, don't really pick up on the subtleties or recognizing there is something to need to be addressed, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
so great points. I mean, those are great points to make as far as that quick transition and just how kids do release their stress
Mm-hmm.
when they do have those activities and have their structure and be able to be with their friends. Just things that some
Mm-hmm.
people may not be able to, they don't compare the two to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Beck, now you are a clinical psychologist and you specialize in trauma care targeted towards the youth. And so I know this is probably an area that kind of hit you guys quite hard regarding the coronavirus pandemic, as well as some of the recent uprising over the couple of days. Now, again, you kind of hit hard in two different areas, and how have you and your colleagues really been able to kind of address these things, or what have you seen some of the biggest obstacles? Like, what is it looking like on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. And in piggybacking with what Julie was just saying, I have a specialty in trauma, but I work primarily within obesity medicine. And those two things are actually quite connected. That's for a different show. But in terms of just activity and schedules and regulation, I mean, that is so much of what we're seeing as the impact of change, in that when the bottom drops out and you go from having a lot of structure to having nothing really within your day, or very few things, it can be really traumatic for kids. It can be overwhelming, and then some kids can pick up and kids and families can pick up and put some structure in the day. And I've actually had some kids who are doing better actually with being at home and having some of the stresses of school removed. But then I also have a lot of patients who have become more dysregulated with eating and activity. So eating too much, not moving enough, and then having ramifications. Depression primarily is the biggest one that I'm seeing. And I'm
Yeah.
speaking specifically about the pandemic, the virus, when I say that. But then adding on the events of the past week with George Floyd, not that it's new in any stretch of the imagination. It is not unprecedented. It is our only precedent, unfortunately, in this country. But then being able to reach out to kids and provide space to be able to say, what do you know? Especially looking at development, because I work with young kids all the way through young adults. So what do you know? Is that appropriate for your age? And what are your thoughts? What's your experience? And here is space for you to say whatever you need or want to say about this. And I'm here to listen and help you process through it to the best of my ability. I don't have all the answers either, but I'm here to discuss with you as much as you want to and have the interest in doing so. And so laying those over each other, there are a lot of overlaps, but they're two sets of conversations, but both very necessary.
Yes. And that leads me to another question for you, Dr. Beck. You definitely, I'm sure, are presented with several different disorders that are related to, that are either triggers or byproducts of weight and depression. And a lot of us could intertwine and involved into one another. And with this 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 abrupt change, like say on two different playing fields, what have you seen just kind of being some of the more triggers or more respondent ways that your clients, patients, children have really kind of, what has been illustrated in the way that they've responded to this over the last 2 weeks, 10 weeks. But not only that, I don't think that it's all negative too. Like you said, there are some kids that have come out on the other end with more positive change. So could you kind of explain some of those dynamics and what you've seen?
Yeah. So, in terms of specifically the virus, kind of like what I mentioned, I am seeing it's almost a bimodal kind of distribution. You're either in one camp or the other in terms of it's been really difficult and really challenging. So, that's where I see the depression and kids who have ADHD who really need that routine and structure, struggling particularly with online learning. My kids with learning disabilities also really struggling with online learning. Kids who don't have parents who are able to be at home with them, and so really left to try and make their own structure. Some significant challenges with that. But at the same time, you've got kids who are really responding well to the space and the freedom to learn at their own pace or get more physical activity, or families are cooking at home more in some instances. And so for a lot of those kids, I hate to say this has been a positive, but the silver lining to the negative experience.
There's some silver lining to it. I agree.
Yeah. And then in terms of really just hitting right back into public conversations about racial justice and discrimination, I have a lot of hope when I experience the younger generation, especially my teenagers and my young adults, in terms of just the things that they say to me and the thoughts that they have and the perspectives that they take, and the things that they are willing to do to share their perspectives, protesting and writing things and just standing up for their beliefs. I'm actually getting chills as I'm just sharing, thinking about some of the conversations I've had, not even just now, but since 2016, in that whole time frame of really being able to be real with kids. And it gives me big hope for the future in terms of the positive responses that I've heard from patients and being able to just see things in a way that I don't think many of us grown-ups have quite figured out yet.
Yeah. I think there's something to say about as you become adults, you have so many different experiences that you live through, and that just kind of keeps remolding your thoughts, your mind. It's kind of hard to kind of break through that. And with children, they're almost like a sponge where there is opportunity to instill ways that we can express ourselves, to instill ways of how can we grow together and build community and all the things that we want to do as a human race. So I think there's a lot to be said about children, their ability and their resiliency during these times.
Absolutely.
When it comes to adults, Julie, I know there's a common thread of how we feel as adults and in how children, how they respond to things. But I know that with them in together, sometimes there is a fine line between the difference, and sometimes there isn't. So what my question to you is, when you see adults and how they respond as far as parenting, do you find that sometimes that there is some projection that's relayed, or do you find that there is more of a projection? I mean, when parents they're stressed out or they have anxiety, they kind of project it onto their children by just saying, "I'm stressed out, I'm tired," and it kind of, our children absorb everything that we do, whether we say it or whether we act. So how have you seen the separation between the two? And if so, how can we as parents kind of be able to best communicate in nonverbal ways so our children don't feel that same stress and anxiety that we feel?
So I think the one of the first things that's really important is just even to kind of connect on an emotional level about that. And I think so many times it's okay to let them know I'm stressed, or I'm a little worried, I'm a little uncertain. This is bringing up, and I think sometimes we try to maybe skip over connecting emotionally and identifying emotionally how we might be feeling about any one given thing. And the uncertainty, I think, is what also can ramp up some of the anxious thoughts or feelings they have, because we've sort of maybe tried to mask it, but yet at the same time, it's sort of, we are actually projecting it because we're trying to stay neutral enough that we don't worry them. But really, if we connect on an emotional level with them and get them working with their emotional vocabulary and identifying where they feel those different emotions in their body physically, then it kind of opens up dialogue. And it's okay, because it's okay to feel scared. it's a little more anxious provoking if we feel scared and feel like we're not supposed to really talk about it, or that
Yeah.
it's okay or it'll be okay, which, I mean, I'm a parent myself, so there's plenty of times we get in the protective, protection mode, and we feel like we want to remove them from any uncomfortable feelings. But the more we can connect with them on their uncomfortable or unsettled or sad feelings, the more it will open up, and there will be kind of less projection, so to speak, because we're just sort of both there, at least identifying that we're feeling the same way they are. So I think we do that without trying to do that sometimes. So I think connecting on an emotional level and establishing kind of emotional communication about things is really good. And I think it's also important to validate. So, I've been working with a lot of seniors, like in high school lately, and, they're devastated on a lot of levels. And of course their parents completely understand that, but in their world, that's a really, really big loss. And sometimes some life experience, we might feel really sad, but we might look at it a little bit differently. Not that the parents aren't, bummed for them, but so much so that some of them have been, really, depressed, like going deep inside where they were not really expressing anything like that, like some real situational depression. And so I think it's just a matter of staying open about the emotional communication, and knowing sometimes when a kid is mad or angry, they're not just maybe having, an attitude or being annoyed because you asked them to make their bed or, clean up the kitchen or something. There might be more going on. And if you establish that pattern of communication, then it kind of opens up dialogue for when little things come along, big things come along. We've kind of established a way to connect on an emotional level.
Yes, I agree. Does anyone want to piggyback off that? Because I see a lot of heads nodding on this. I would tell you one thing you said, Julie, and it just kind of took me back to, I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and we were talking about just how we are as adults, and some of her, in her past, when she would get upset or get, be hurt, whatever expression of, upset, anger, or just being upset, she was told to go to her room and deal with it and come back out with a smile. And so, you're not building, by us not providing children with tools and ways to handle their emotions, be able to know it's okay to be upset, but understand how to funnel it, how to express it. I think that we do it a disservice, and sometimes we don't know we do it a disservice because we may not have had that as adults. And I think as generations progress, it gets, like you said, Dr. Beck, it gets kind of easier and easier as far as communication. And I think that's, how we have, as adults, have to kind of be aware of how we were raised and what we thought was right, and not try to, spill it over to our kids. And like they recognize that emotional level, Julie, and be with them at that emotional level.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now,
I think parents are sometimes uncomfortable with things that they can't fix for their children, and they almost don't want to hear that their child is upset about something if it's not something that they can fix for them. And these are situations we're in right now that there's no simple fix. We're just going to have to sit with it, and we're going to have to walk through it. And, parents can still support their kids and, validate that they're angry and that they're upset, and say, I understand that, but we're going to walk through it together.
I think that's the big part. That's kind of a overarching message, is doing it together. You mentioned, Emily, in one of your statements that stood out to me. You said you've seen a lot of resilience in the children, and just I believe this events, these series of events we're going through, it's like a double-edged sword. There is some negative things that has happened during these times, but there's also some, like Dr. Beck said, some silver lining. So when you made that statement that, you've seen a lot of resilience in students, Emily, what perspectives have you seen on the more positive side?
Well, one of the things that we were doing as school counselors is reaching out to kids, and every week we would ask them, so what's going well for you? And the answers that we got back were really encouraging. Some of the kids have really, really treasured the time with family. Our kids are very rushed, just like adults are rushed these days. And they don't necessarily get the time with their family and with their siblings. And some of our kids are very heavily scheduled. And whether it be something like sports and activities, or whether it's before school care and after school care and things like that. And I think it's given kids a chance to slow down, and we've sort of reoriented towards family in some ways. And I think kids are enjoying that. I've had, kids talk to me about, I have time to draw, and I have time to read books to my little sister and play with the dog, and, just very simple things. Go fishing, with my dad, or something like that, that it's very simple, and yet it's not something that we often have a lot of time, to fit into the busy schedules that these kids, are often typically experiencing. But I've heard kids talking about gratitude, being grateful for what they have, maybe, involving some service in their lives, checking in on neighbors, and, a young man who asks, can I take the trash can from your garage out to the curb, for an elderly neighbor, or something like that. And I think just being able to do something to help others also gives them some sense of purpose right now when they're, feeling a little bit adrift overall.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great segue, because we're going to talk about just adapting to these new routines and ways of living. And like you said, Emily, children are more resilient, and you've seen some areas of resiliency, and areas where, if you're not distracted by your phone or what's going on in school, or the every rigmarole when you have a busy schedule, you have that time to just start looking, being more considerate and compassionate of others, and being able to kind of look at this as a whole versus a me. Because I think as we grow up, and especially in teenage years, we just naturally are more self-centered. So I think this may be an opportunity where people are starting to look beyond themselves, especially younger children. So in regards to just new ways of living, and whatever that word means in these different given times, Julie, I have a question for you. With the support of friends not being there, with the school structure gone, with the summer programs being canceled, there aren't any clubs, sports teams, all the different components that center around children and keeps them busy and keeps them enriched through the summertime. That's really not here. And you mentioned a lot of things about the emotional piece, and parents being, kind of being being able to express your emotion and kind of be able to have that communication. I know that you specialize in areas of like emotional regulations, and just establishing like maybe some words of advice that parents can, what can be applicable for a parent, trying to figure out even how to have that conversation, or to lay the platform where there can be a conversation.
Yeah. So I think if you notice that so there's, well, little thing I want to say before that. So, we were all removed and we were all home, and for at least probably 4 weeks, it was pretty solitude, right? Before anyone was really kind of doing too much out and about a little bit, before a social distance walk or a social distance neighbor, hanging out kind of thing. So, emotionally you had to shut down pretty quick, like just adjust. You just had to just quickly adjust. And, simple tasks like going to the grocery store, like things like that became like really overwhelming, like really almost fearful. Because am I protected right? And when I come home, how do I clean everything and all of that? So, helping, but then now we're kind of segueing. So for summer, and as we move through it all, there's a little reentry process. So we all sort of got used to being at home, and we kind of accepted that and dealt with that a little bit, and then sprinkled in a little social here and there. And now we're kind of ramping back up. and re-entering. So as parents may be going back to work a little more, the kids are still not really getting, the summer programs, a lot of the camps. So it'll be a little bit of an interesting way to adjust, meaning mom is going back, dad's going back to day, like more regular office and back and forth, and you're kind of still home. So if you notice their frustration is getting ramped up, even though you're trying to provide different kinds of outlets or, things for them to do, or, I know of some high school girls that are doing, little camps for, small little groups of 3 or 4 neighborhood girls that, are younger, and they can do crafts and things with them. So some people are being really creative, which again is another silver lining of how to sort of use this time to, be creative in that way. But if you notice emotional frustration, again, I think what we can do is try to check in ourselves first, because if we mirror their intensity or their frustration, which is easy to do, because if somebody comes at you about something they're mad about or frustrated about, or not, kind of handling a situation how you want it, we can mirror our kids' emotional sort of demeanor. And if we can just sort of ourselves stay emotionally regulated or a little calm, and kind of meet them where they are and validate that, you're frustrated. I understand that, maybe give them some, time. I'm going to give you, just about 3 or 4 seconds, 5 seconds to just kind of relax, maybe breathe. And again, I would regroup and say, tell me, try and get them to dig deeper about what's frustrating, or is it frustration? Like, have them identify the emotional language of what it is, because mad and frustrated isn't just the only thing going on. There's usually a second layer. I'm sad about this, or I actually miss. If you allow it to break open and unfold, you'll probably get to a little different of a space that could really have good dialogue to help them work through it. So I think to help them, you just don't want to mirror them. And that's the one thing we can do really quick. So in general, to help them regulate, I would try to, when you notice they're upset or frustrated, just kind of validate that. Stick in your, most calm demeanor that you can, and then get them to kind of try to connect emotionally a little bit deeper as to what is going on. Because it's probably not just about the surface thing they're frustrated with. It could be something else that you have a real opportunity to connect with them emotionally.
Great. That's really helpful. Thanks for explaining that. I know when there are more steps, at some point, there can be indication that more steps need to be taken. And it may be outside of a parent's ability. And I think that's a fair way to recognize if that's the case. So, and Dr. Beck, this is kind of where you step in. What can you give parents, when it comes to tips on knowing when it's time to consider, needing their children needing therapy, and even outside of that, what can they do, in the meantime if they're seeing their kids dealing with certain difficulties?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, a rule of thumb is anytime you notice anything different with your kid, that's time to consider an assessment to see what might be going on. So changes in appetite, sleep, mood, increases in irritability, less interest in things or people that have typically been interesting for them, reactions to things that are different, changes in academics, honestly, just anything that doesn't seem normal in terms of how they usually are or just feels off, right? Parent gut is a very powerful and honest thing. That's a great time to consider the option for treatment. And so just having that opportunity to have someone ask questions and figure out, what else is going on and provide that support. But that all being said, honestly, even if nothing appears to be wrong, therapy is good for everyone.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to
Yeah.
go to a certain level for that to be a service that's needed. And I think, especially for children, it's great to introduce that to them at a young age, because that to me opens up that dialogue, opens up them having the ability to communicate. I
Yeah.
totally
I mean,
agree.
everyone can learn new skills and new things, and therapy doesn't mean that you're crazy. Behavioral health treatment, mental health treatment is not a bad thing. It's a wise thing, honestly, because we grow. So all of that in terms of taking kids or yourselves as adults for treatment. But then things that we can do to support kids at home is, again, unconditional love. And providing that space to be there, to talk, to listen. And we've kind of already said how challenging that can be for adults to have conversations about things that they feel uncertain about themselves or can't fix, or might feel too dysregulated by themselves to even feel like they can have that conversation. But we're never really putting anything past our kids when we try to think that we are.
It's true.
And
So
so being able to try and hold that space, and even if that conversation is, again, I'm scared too, and that's okay, that's a great conversation.
Yeah. And it's interesting, your specialty is in the area of weight management, because a lot of times, as a dietitian, I understand when I see someone that perhaps is overweight, it's not, that's the reflection, that's the illustration of something else that's deeper. And being able to target that at a younger age, to, for me, that's great that you have focused your practice in that particular stage of someone's life. Yeah. Yeah. Those are great. Anyone, I need to be writing notes on all these different areas, because this is great information, especially for parents. And how can we help parents parent in these times? I really think that's kind of what this is looking like. In lieu of the parenting components, after the summer comes and goes, there is something that may be considered a school year. And that's something to consider too, just like you said, kind of reentry back into what does that look like? We don't know yet. I don't think we have those answers. But I know in regards to the school system, Emily, I'm sure that your school district, you guys have been putting some potential things in place in regards to how are we going to kind of implement education back, even dealing with the family dynamics, especially like you said, those in lower income places. When it comes to food is an issue too. What have been some things that you guys have been working on to try to plot out what the upcoming year may be for our kids?
Well, for one of the things, we have extended our summer school for, it's usually just the month of June, and now it's going to go through the entire summer, which I think is I hope will be helpful to students. We've had an overwhelming turnout for summer school. Now it's all virtual, so but still, it seems to be something that kids are needing, that connection, and that parents are also needing, so that they have, somebody else that's supporting their kids in addition to just themselves. So that's part of it. But we really don't know what the fall is going to look like.
Yes.
So we have folks working on all different scenarios. Will we be back in the building? That's one possibility. Will there be some kind of blend between virtual school and in-person school? That's another possibility. Um, so many different scenarios have been discussed. But I think one of the things that I appreciate that my district's doing right now is having listening sessions with the parents, because we can throw lessons at kids and we can, think that we know what families need. But we really need to get a better idea of how have families experienced this online learning so far? What has worked? What has not worked for you? And really deeply, deeply listen to the responses that we get. There are a lot of, experts in education, but really at this point, our families are providing us with the most valid information, and then we're going to have to adapt to what they need. And I have a feeling this is going to be something that we just keep learning and keep tweaking as we go along. because this is so new for all of us.
Yes. Um, and I never considered that component of bringing the parents in regards to just creating a plan and using them as your, because they're the go-to, they're the person, they're the elements in between the education and the students. As we're getting closer towards the end of our panel, I want to create some key takeaways that, and best practices that we can give for parents or just trusted adults that have students, young ones at home. Emily, I'm going to start off with you. You just actually kind of answer some of the questions, the main question I was going to ask you, but maybe you could put a little bit more, give us a little bit more information in regards to this particular topic. We know right now without having these other elements in our young student lives, our young children's lives, as far as their teammates, summertime teammates, their summertime friends, and like I say, summer school, these different normalities that we're used to. How can parents step into the role and better equip themselves for their kids during the summertime, and even just communicating with them, about what it may look like going into the school year. I know again there's a lot of vagueness to that in regards to no one really knows, but like what would be some steps, or what would be some things you would probably try to tell parents to kind of prepare their students for?
Well, for one thing, I really feel like parents need to practice self-care first and foremost, because if we're drained and depleted, we have nothing to offer our kids. So sometimes, that's hard for a parent to hear, but it's so crucial that they take care of themselves. And there are so many different things going on in our world right now that are difficult for us to deal with, and acknowledging that and realizing that it's okay to be struggling right now, and that it's okay not to do everything perfectly right now, I think is extremely important. As far as our kids go, you know, read with your kids, even just something as simple as that, it creates that kind of bonding time. Um, and also, academically, I mean, reading is probably the one thing that's going to cut across all academic disciplines more than anything else. So we really encourage reading. Um, check in with your local library. A lot of the libraries now are doing some kind of virtual fun programs for kids, and those are neat opportunities for kids to tap into. We have to find creative ways to connect with others, because isolation is very risky for children, especially for teenagers. So, watch how your kids are acting. Are they, still having connections with other kids, with family members, even our extended family that we don't, typically get to see right now? How can we reconnect with those people who are, important aspects of our kids' lives? And try to keep that positive outlook that, I know this is really difficult, but we're going to adapt and we're going to do the best we can. If you don't know how to use the technology or something that the school is sending home, or parents all of a sudden have to know what Google Classroom is, and they're not things that they've dealt with before. Ask for the support that you need. Reach out to the school. They'll certainly be, we'll be around all summer responding to parents. So, let us know what you need and let us support you, so that you're not feeling like you have to be absolutely everything
Yes,
in
by
your child's
yourself doing it.
right now.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that, Emily. That really helps to just give people just some quick nuggets on things that they may not consider. You said things about the virtual component. Yes, we can't go see our grandparents or go see our cousins and do our family trips. So let's create a virtual, gathering that we can all get on the computer and interact and keep those relationships going, because we've kind of gone through, okay, we're isolated now, we got to figure it out. Now it's like, how can we create, like, again, a new normal in the situation with internet and technology? I think is making a way for us right now.
Yeah.
Now,
And it
Dr.
has to be
Beck,
something that's going to be sustainable over time. We can all react to an immediate crisis, but when it's that crisis mode that then becomes sort of the new normal that we're going to need to deal with, not just for a few weeks, but months or a year or
Yeah.
longer.
And that means reestablishing new traditions. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation about that in the last film, like how during these times, instead of breaking families, we're still be finding ways to build families, build new tradition, build new connections, because this may be a new establishment of how we interact, or be an additional establishment of how we interact. Dr. Beck, you work with groups. From what I read in your bio, you can definitely go deeper into that, because I may not be saying it exactly, but from my understanding, you also work in groups, and I don't know if it's something that you do already. But when Emily was talking, do parents have like have you seen any support groups that have been built for parents, like during these times, to kind of give them a form to communicate with each other what they're dealing with? They're giving each other ideas. Like, have you seen any of that arise, or have you guys thought about any of those type of approaches? I feel like helping parents, like Emily say, it's going to kind of help parents help their children in a way,
Yeah, I can't speak to specific groups about the pandemic. Right off the bat, we in healthcare were just in as much of a state of shock as individuals were, in terms of, okay, how do we completely overhaul to telemedicine, like overnight?
Yeah.
And so, but now that we are also up and running, groups are starting to occur. So actually, so in my clinic, we have traditionally always had evening groups for children and families who have obesity. And so we are no longer able to hold those in person. So we are trialing them all online starting next week. And so it'll be an opportunity for, again, parents and kids who are all working towards the same goals to have that education, but also, again, just a sense of togetherness. Even though we're all going to start off as strangers, part of the group benefit, whether in person, also hopefully virtually, is another face, someone else to talk to, some commiseration, just that we are all in it together perspective. And so now that healthcare has started to stabilize and kind of figure out how to have made that transition, now we can actually build some additional things that can be of hopeful benefit.
Yeah. I think that's I'm glad you guys got to that place where you're able to now, because I definitely see that's going to be the next need after, the next need is going to kind of help keep things together and keep families prepared and just kind of navigating through this. And again, we don't know how long this is going to be or what it's going to turn into. So best equipping them, I think, is going to be the best plan right now. Thank you for that. Julie, I'm gonna let you take it home.
Okay.
You mentioned a lot of things. I want to see what your takeaways are with this.
Well, I think again, if we stick a little bit on the emotional part, which to me is a really big thing to start to get in the groove of just connecting on an emotional level with your kids. So being okay expressing how you might be feeling emotionally, and then how they're feeling emotionally. Now, I think part of how we do that and how we kind of talk to them is where we can get pretty creative. Sometimes people can pass back, a notebook back and forth if they don't want to have direct, eye-to-eye conversation. And so they kind of write. It's easier to do kind of questions back and forth. You could write down your concerns or fears, and you could pass the notebook back and forth. Walking and talking is a really good way to do that as well. And I think that, I think in schools, mindfulness and meditation has kind of been unfolding in these places, and a lot, we've heard a lot of terminology about it, but there really is a lot of access on, even, YouTube. I mean, you can find it anywhere, looking up just meditation. And even if you begin to start a little kind of family meditation, it can be 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I mean, you don't need to start big. It's just grounding yourself to the present moment. And that mindfulness also really helps you emotionally regulate too. So if you can kind of find that space, and I actually encourage the people I work with and to start on a very small amount of time. There's one, and some of the meditations are a minute and a half. So just kind of, it can guide you. And if you do that with them, I think that's a really good way to kind of just at least help them ground themselves and then maybe regroup with what is, going on or what I can deal with. And once it's like a practice though, it's like anything we practice, you got to practice. And you want to practice not when you're just emotionally intense. You want to practice, kind of day to day, sort of like if you're going to go run a 5K, you got to start by running, a mile at a time or so on. So I think connecting on the emotional level, finding little bit ways creatively to communicate, and know that it's just as much their choice, your child's choice, as your choice on how to communicate. Sometimes I'm a parent myself, but I've had to learn, like when I wanted to talk about this right now and what's wrong and tell me, and did you turn this in and how did this go? That might not always be their perfect time to communicate. So establishing together when it works for both of you to communicate and when it feels comfortable and easy is going to be better than when we just want it now, so it's a group effort together. So figuring out when, and a lot of movement. I'm into movement. I mean, you got to move, got to get outside and walk and move and stuff. I think those are good ways to help kind of regulate emotional intensity too.
I love it. Thank you so much, Julie, for those. Thank you. We're wrapping it up. And before we leave, I want to make sure that I create opportunity for those of you that are out there and just want to have some resources or want to perhaps chat with one of these ladies off scene. I want to give them opportunity to kind of give you ways that you can contact them. So Dr. Beck, do you mind providing just some information on how someone can learn about your services and be able to perhaps talk with you about anything?
I would say the best way to find me and the clinics that I'm located in would be at the website of my institution. So childrensmercy.org, I believe, is the correct website. But if you just Google Children's Mercy Kansas City, it will pop up. And so you can look at Find a Provider and type in my name, or I am in the weight management program. And so if you have questions about what we offer for kids who are working on creating healthier lifestyles, you can find that stuff there.
Great. And now that you're virtual, I mean, someone that doesn't necessarily have to be in Kansas City to be able to work with you. Is that correct?
Well, because of billing laws,
okay.
for Kansas, unfortunately, right now.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you can perhaps guide them or recommend someone that they would be able to be a good professional for them. So, yeah. Okay. Great. Julie, could you give us information about your private practice and ways people can reach you?
Yeah, sure. You can, counselingwithjulie.com, I think. It's either, it is .com. And also my email is easy, juliewalther@me.com. So that, you can find me there.
Okay. Great. And Emily, Emily, I'm not sure how that works when you work for a school district, but what would be some information you can provide for, where can someone, learn about or know about some of the things you guys are doing, or if there's someone they can speak with?
Well, I would be more than happy to speak with anybody who wanted to talk further. My email is elehr, so it's ELEHR @msdr9.org, and feel free to reach out. Feel free to reach out to your own school's, counseling department as well, because I'm sure that they would be more than happy to help you. But sure, I'd love to talk with anyone who would like to.
Great. Well, ladies, once again, I appreciate you taking the time and providing your expertise and your passion that's all behind it. You guys came with some great information this evening.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks for all you do.
No, thank you. Yes, and you're welcome. And so, with this particular conversation, this is something that can be, that needs to be spread across different platforms. And we as parents, we're all in this, trying to figure this thing out in light of what's happening to our world. So if you have found this particular this particular panel resourceful, Do not hesitate to share this amongst your colleagues and your friends and your family, because let's figure this all out together. Talk to you guys soon and see you next week.
All right.
Thank
All
you.
right, ladies. You're welcome. So continue to come back for more wellness-related topics. Please join me every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Central Time, right here in my dining room, to help give you information on all wellness-related topics that mean the most to you during these times. And don't forget to support our students by going to www.genyouthnow.org to learn about their grant funding program in response to the COVID-19 crisis. It's called For School's Sake. So follow them on Facebook and Instagram and see all of the impact they are making by supplying schools with resources and food needed to keep our students safe and fed. So thanks again, and see you soon.